What do we know about the humans in the Warcraft universe? I think a lot of us instantly think about the first war against the orcs, but we won't touch on that story till much later. Instead, how about we go back in time and start from what would be called their beginning? Now, as mentioned before in previous episodes, these videos are an abridgment of the Chronicle series. Currently, we are on Volume 1. And again, I have to mention that this is an abridgment. This is a condensed version of these books, which are already a condensed version of the story. So we will not be talking about Tyranda's neighbor, Jake the Elf, and what color boots he wore and why he wore that color. These videos are a simplified version of the story just to get an idea of what happened pertaining to the lore. And if this is your first time here, I recommend starting from the very beginning. I'll put a link to the series in the description down below. But if you're caught up and ready to continue our journey, then let's get going. Mentioned in episode 4, the Vrykhuls that stayed in Tirisfal gave birth to what they would consider degenerate offspring. They would be called humans, and for thousands of years, this young race would flourish in the Eastern Kingdoms. Groups of hunter-gatherer humans traveled through the lands, and as their society evolved and advanced, they would establish different tribes. Much like the other races, these tribes practiced crude forms of druidism and elemental shamanism. Despite the presence of other races such as the Amani Trolls and High Elves, humanity's greatest adversary proved to be itself. These early tribes fought over land and power, but one of these groups, the Arathi, realized how wrong this was. Troll incursions into human territories became more common, and this was a sign that something was changing among the Amani to the north. What the Arathi knew was this: if humans remained divided, they would stand little chance against the trolls. This is when a warlord by the name of Thoradin would lead the Arathi on a campaign to unite the different tribes under one banner, and this would be done by either force or diplomacy. Now, the Arathi lived on the northeastern borders of human lands. They also had a long history of skirmishes with the trolls. And because of these fights, Thoradin had become a master tactician and strategist. Over a span of 6 years, he would bring the other tribes to his side. This was done either by pitting rivals against each other, using political marriages to join forces, and sometimes he was forced to conquer some of the more belligerent tribes. Surprisingly, those that were overthrown weren't ruled over by a tyrant. Thoradin offered his former enemies peace and equality in what he claimed would be a glorious new human nation, a united kingdom of limitless potential. The leaders of the now defeated tribes would not lose their standing as said leaders. Rather, they would become honored generals in the combined army. Thoradin's decisions to hand out these ranks won the loyalty of his adversaries, and he was crowned king. He would name his new kingdom Arathor, and tasked his most gifted builders to construct a mighty capital called Strom, located southeast of Tirisfal Glades. The terrain that they established the city in was a perfect buffer zone that prohibited the Amani from launching forest ambushes. Because if you look around the area in-game, there's hardly, if at all, any forest to be seen. Thoradin also ordered his people to build a great wall to increase the security from the trolls. Named after the king who created it, we know this structure as Thoradin's Wall. The might of Strom quickly spread to other human villages, thus drawing them to migrate to the great city for safety. And just as the king expected, the trolls began to move in on outlying lands controlled by the humans. This is when Thoradin dispatched 2 of his generals to gather intel on the enemy. One of them was Igneous, Originally, he and his people lived in the Alterac Mountains. Not the most popular people amongst the humans, but the Northlanders were unmatched in their bravery and strength. With that, they traveled beyond the borders of Arathor, slaughtering any trolls that they found lurking in the woodlands. This would later earn Igneous the name Trollbane, because of the amount of Amani blood that he spilled. The other general, Lordain, came from Tirisfal Glades. And speaking about Tirisfal Glades, I think this is a good time to mention something important. What happened to Tyr's silver hand that was placed over his burial site? Well, at this point in the timeline, nobody really knows. What we do know is that the silver hand became a common symbol for the human tribes, appearing on clothing, pendants, worn to ward off evil spirits. Centuries later, it would come to represent a great order of paladins. But we'll get to them in time. For now, let's get back to General Lordain. He and his men were considered to be more refined than Igneous. They carried with them a knightly appearance and mindset, and patrolled the edges of the kingdom, taking out any Amani raiding parties that got too close. Both of the generals occasionally returned to Strom and reported on the activities of their enemies. They also talked about the conflict between the Amani and High Elves to the north. But there was something else. Whisperings of a strange darkness in the forests. Tales of voodoo rituals and supernatural beings prowling the wilds in the dead of night. Even though these reports were unsettling, Thoradin and his generals agreed to not risk the safety of their own people by sending them to aid the High Elves. For the most part, they kept their forces behind Strom's massive ramparts, confident that they could withstand any foe. After being defeated by the High Elves a long time ago, the Amani trolls plotted revenge within their temple city of Zul'Aman. But the main problem within their tribe was the lack of a leader. They were fierce warriors, yes, but without some sort of leader, they would tear each other apart from within. Luckily, this would be resolved by the Zandalari tribe. The Zandalari were more like the protectors of the troll race. They looked to strengthen every troll society across the world of Azeroth, many of which had languished since the time of the Great Sundering. Even the Zandalari had suffered. Their once glorious mountain was swallowed by the sea, leaving nothing more than a small island behind. But they saw an opportunity within the Amani, a chance to revitalize one of the most powerful tribes the troll race had ever seen, and reassert their dominance in the Eastern Kingdoms. Now, taking out the High Elves would be no easy task, but there seemed to be some confidence from the Zandalari that the outcome would be victorious. But why is that? Well, Quel'Thalas wasn't as powerful as the ancient Night Elf civilization that trampled over the trolls before the Sundering, and the Zandalari had perfected their voodoo arts over recent millennia. Everything seemed to be in their favor now. A few Zandalari emissaries made the journey from their island home to Zul'Aman. There, they promised to help the Amani with their attack against the High Elves. They also ensured that the mighty Loa demigods would aid them in battle. And lastly, to settle the conflict that was raging due to lack of leadership, they appointed one of the Amani's most fearless warriors named Jintha to rule over his people. Now, they were ready to start the aggression. Small warbands began attacking Quel'Thalas' borders to test the High Elves' strength, never showing their actual full strength in numbers and capabilities. This was merely a way to gather intel, and after a while, the Amani decided that the time for all-out war had finally come. Without any warning, tens of thousands of troll fighters emerged from the forests. Gigantic Loa demigods accompanied them, infusing the trolls with supernatural might. The High Elves struggled to hold back their enemies and were forced to give ground. In the blink of an eye, the Amani had decimated the outer reaches of Quel'Thalas. Back in Zul'Aman, the Zandalari emissaries watched as the war began to swell. They knew that it was only a matter of time before the trolls would be victorious. Back in Strom, King Thoradin kept an eye on what was going on. He had sent scouts, and sure enough, they returned with word of the war between the High Elves and the trolls. Part of their reports contained details on the events happening up north. Smoke rose from Quel'Thalas' borders. Elven corpses littered the land. And it was very clear that the trolls were winning. This is when Thoradin decided to send aid, right? Well, I think we would have wanted something like that to happen. Instead, he stuck to his belief that interfering would put his people at unnecessary risk. And that's how things would remain, until a group of High Elven ambassadors sent by King Anasterian's Sunstrider suddenly arrived at Strom. They shared tales of the events that were transpiring. It was worse than Thoradin had imagined. It was clear that without assistance from Strom, Quel'Thalas would be destroyed. And once that was done, Strom would be the next target on the Amani's radar. Following the meeting, Thoradin and his advisors agreed that allying with the elves was necessary. But there was a problem. The nation of Arathor didn't have the numbers to fight an open conflict with the trolls. And after much deliberation, they came to a conclusion. If the humans were taught magic, then there might be a fighting chance. Elven magic was legendary among the humans, but they had never learned its secrets. Even though Thoradin wasn't much of a fan of sorcery in any form, he knew that it was needed in order to vanquish the Amani. So, the next day, the king pitched his offer to the elves. "We'll aid you with our army. You teach us magic." Immediately, the High Elves dispatched messengers to consult with King Anasterian. This wasn't an easy decision. The Elf King knew the dangers of unchecked magic, and teaching the arcane arts to humans could easily lead to disaster. With little to no other option, Anasterian agreed to have the High Elves tutor 100 humans in the rudimentary ways of magic. Not long after the agreement was made, Elven Magi were sent to Strom and began teaching. Over the course of many months, the elves noticed that their students possessed a natural affinity to magic, despite their lack of grace and subtlety in casting. While class was in session, Thoradin established strongholds at the base of the Alterac Mountains, creating a staging point for any future offensive attacks against the trolls. Other outposts were built as well, east of Tirisfal Glades, but Alterac Fortress was the most important northern holding. Finally, the elves had completed their task in teaching magic to the new human magi. Then, Arathor began its attack. 20,000 human soldiers assembled at Alterac Fortress, and from there, Thoradin led them north to Quel'Thalas. Surprisingly, though, he didn't bring any of his new magi with him. They remained behind the walls of Alterac. And if things played out the way that Thoradin had hoped, then the newly taught magi would play a significant part later in the war. Both General Igneous and Lordain rode days ahead as vanguard to Arathor's army, clearing a path north by slaughtering any troll scouts or raiding parties. Weeks later, Thoradin's army reached the outskirts of Quel'Thalas, smashing directly into the southern flank of the Amani, while the High Elves launched a counterattack from the north. The Amani were now fighting on two fronts. But their leader, Jintha, remained confident that they would emerge victorious. Here's what the trolls knew. Seeing the humans show up was a clear sign that the elves were desperate. They also knew that humans were great fighters, but lacked the magic powers and discipline that the High Elves had. This made the humans nothing more than a nuisance to the trolls. Treating them as an annoying fly in the room that needed to be dealt with quickly, Jintha turned his forces to face Arathor's army, intending to eradicate them before continuing his focus on the High Elves. Thoradin gave the order to retreat back towards Alterac, but slowly. The battle would drag on for weeks as the Amani chased down the humans into the mountains. Following behind, the High Elves emerged from Quel'Thalas and made their way towards Alterac as well. slowly taking out the trolls' northern flank as they traveled. During this retreat, the Amani began gaining on the humans a little too fast, threatening to overrun them. In hoping to correct this, General Lordain volunteered to waylay the trolls, knowing full well that he would not survive. In a narrow valley, he and 500 warriors held off the Amani, while the main army continued their retreat to the south. Sadly, as expected, Lordain and his men gave the ultimate sacrifice. But because of this, Thoradin and his army weren't overrun. Lordain's legacy of pure selflessness would live on among his people in the coming millennia. When Thoradin and his army arrived at Alterac Fortress, he was pleased to see that the Amani continued their pursuit. This was his plan all along. As a thick fog rolled in one morning, the battle truly began. For days, neither side gave ground, even though the Amani largely outnumbered the Arathi. Then, the High Elves showed up and attacked from the northern side. When the humans and elves felt that the troll numbers had diminished a bit, they unleashed their secret weapon, the 100 human magi. During the fight over the past few days, they had been kept hidden within the fortress, and now was the time for them to test their skills in battle. Alongside the elven sorcerers, the human magi unleashed their newfound powers. But instead of attacking individual trolls, they pooled their magic together and wove a single terrible spell. The land trembled as torrents of fire rained down from the blood-red sky. These flames burned from the inside out, not only the Amani ranks, but also the Loa. One of the first to be fully consumed by the fire was Jintha, and without their leader, the surviving trolls broke ranks and retreated north, only to be hunted down by the humans and elves. The Zandalari emissaries were stunned. Confident that in no way could they lose the war, they hung their heads in disbelief and made their way back home to their distant island. For them, the defeat marked a dark turning point in troll history, one that their race would have a hard time, if ever, recovering from. On the flip side, Quel'Thalas and Arathor were beginning a glorious new era. Months after the war had ended, celebration graced the streets of Strom and Silvermoon City, and the High Elves even pledged their undying loyalty to Arathor and Thoradin's descendants. After King Thoradin's reign had ended, new generations of humans expanded the nation of Arathor in size and power. Many of the human magi tutored pupils in the ways of the arcane, and not before long, the number of spellcasters within Arathor had increased dramatically. Over time, and with the protection of magic so abundant, the humans established new settlements in the frontier lands. Even forts used in the Troll Wars were occupied and later grew to become busy trading outposts. But out of all the lands used, the most coveted were located in Tirisfal Glades. The Arathi established a stronghold to protect their farmsteads from gnolls, kobolds, and other dangerous wildlife. Many former soldiers settled there as well, renaming the region Lordaran in honor of the late General Lordain. Other Arathi expanded to the coastal area known as Gilneas. There, they fished the waters and became a very popular trading harbor. As their relationship with the sea strengthened, some of the more daring soldiers ventured into the open waters around Gilneas. They would discover a large island to the south, rich with resources and metal ores. Some of these sailors remained there and founded the maritime outpost named Quel'Thalas. As these new establishments grew and formed their own customs, the ruling powers of Arathor's capital, Strom, were worried that these settlements would become too independent. And that's what tended to happen. The first and most notable example of this was the trading outpost of Dalaran. This city was built in the middle of Arathor and was known as a major trading center. Not only that, but people traveled there in hopes for wealth or a new future. One of these immigrants was a brilliant mage named Artigan. who later won the admiration of Dalaran's people and was elected as its ruler. Under his guidance, Dalaran would expand its power and evolve into a fully autonomous city-state, completely self-governed. Not only that, but the city would become a much-needed haven for Arathor's Magi, a population that the kingdom's citizens viewed with suspicion and wariness. This is somewhat sad, because the growth of this nation was because of the Magi and the protection they gave to the settlers. But over time, people began to feel superstitious, which ignited tension between the magic users and normal folk. Many of the Magi left the cities and towns out of anger for being subjected to nothing more than paranoia. This is when Dalaran's leader, Artigan, invited them to his city. There, he told them that they would live free of prejudice. Many took him up on that offer and established Dalaran as a glorious center of knowledge. Gleaming spires rose while vast libraries and repositories were constructed. Not only that, but a new government formed by mages was established to run the city. Focusing on the encouragement of arcane studies, word of Dalaran spread and became a symbol of hope and freedom. In a few years, the population exploded. Not every citizen was a magic user, but the protection that was offered allowed trade and industry to grow without limitations. Crime was virtually non-existent, and any dangers of the wild were largely forgotten. But, as we've seen in the past, this unchecked spellcasting had disastrous consequences. The reckless use of magic began tearing through the fabric of reality in the region. We have to remember, the humans were still very, very new to the study of arcane magic. Dalaran's Magi were clueless that waves of arcane energy flew out from the city and into the twisting nether. And like before, demons were drawn to its attention, slipping into the physical world and infiltrating Dalaran itself. The good thing was that these demons were weak and alone, but that doesn't mean that they didn't cause some sort of chaos, thus terrorizing the peaceful city. The governing Magi struggled to deal with these demonic intrusions. Not only was it difficult to confront the situation, but it was also challenging to keep it a secret from the public. If the now superstitious population learned the truth, panic and riot would begin. Accepting that they needed help, the leaders of Dalaran reached out to Quel'Thalas for assistance, hoping that the elves would have some knowledge on how to deal with the situation. Without hesitation, the Council of Silvermoon immediately sent out the greatest of their Magi to investigate. Even though only a few demons were confirmed to have entered the physical world, the elves knew that this would only be the beginning. It would get much worse unless the governing Magi of Dalaran placed limits on humans using magic. This solution didn't go over so well. Many of Dalaran's leaders rejected the recommendations from the High Elves. The whole point of mages moving to Dalaran was to freely practice magic as they saw fit. Limiting their liberty to do so was counterproductive. Many of the mages living in the city would leave and practice the arcane arts elsewhere. At worst, Dalaran's entire economy would collapse. Either way, the use of arcane magic was going to continue, regardless of what limits were placed on those practicing magic. That meant that the threat of another invasion from the Burning Legion would always exist. Knowing that they couldn't outright ban magic, the Council of Silvermoon and the head Magi of Dalaran decided on another solution. They would form a clandestine order to deal with the demonic invaders. Meeting within a secret grove in Tirisfal Glades to discuss their work, this group of High Elves and humans would later be called the Council of Tirisfal. Their main goal would be to track and banish agents of the Legion whenever they would reveal themselves. Their other responsibility would be to quietly educate other Magi about the dangers of reckless spell weaving. Now, we've heard of the term Guardian before. either in a quest or movie or even a book like The Last Guardian. But I feel that a lot of us don't know exactly what a Guardian was, and more so, the history behind it all. So let's dig in a little bit and clear things up. After the Council of Tirisfal was formed, the first members quietly tracked down and banished any demons they could find. But when faced with overly powerful enemies, the council members would channel their abilities into a single individual. That person would then act as a solitary vessel for a short time. But this act of empowering a single person was a dangerous ritual and was only done in dire circumstances, because the massive influx of energy that the chosen individual would be subjected to could kill him or her. If they survived, they would be able to overwhelm even the Burning Legion's mightiest agents. Despite the risks, this was done many times over the years. But that all changed when a dreadlord by the name of Council infiltrated Dalaran. This demon spread its poison throughout the city, releasing a state of paranoia among the citizens living within. This led to the council confronting Council and discovering that they were clearly outmatched by the demon. Knowing that they couldn't win this fight, they empowered a High Elf named Arathor Brighthand, who then charged at Council with the combined power of the council. Rather than fight the newly gifted mage, the demon instead directed its focus on the other members of the order, those that were channeling their power into Arathor. They were now vulnerable, unable to defend themselves. As Council began its assault, the connection between the council members and Arathor was disrupted, which in turn weakened his powers until eventually he fell to the demon. It was only the intervention of a young half-elf named Alodi who saved the council from total annihilation. As the council attacked for a second time, but as individual members with their own powers, Council easily overpowered them, shattering the little confidence and hope that resided within the members of the order. So the empowering ritual didn't work. It left them vulnerable to attack, and fighting as a unified force was ineffective. This is when Alodi presented a solution. He and his allies discovered a new way to wield their combined power. A new ritual was brought to the table that allowed the members of the order to permanently grant someone a portion of their power. And since this was permanent, the council didn't need to be present during the battle in order to channel anything. Alodi was the first to undergo this experimental technique. When the complex ritual was proven to be successful, Alodi declared himself as the council's guardian, a title different from the previous ritual that only lent power to an individual for a short time, that being known as the champion. Now, the newly empowered Alodi faced off with Council and struck it down, banishing it back to the Twisting Nether. Hailed as a hero, Alodi would serve as the first guardian of Tirisfal. He used his great powers to prolong his life, and for 100 years he served by hunting down minions of the Legion. At the end of his century of service, he voluntarily relinquished his power, choosing to live out the remainder of his days in peace and tranquility. This began the tradition of the Guardian. Every 100 years, a new mage would rise up and dedicate his or her life to the protection of Azeroth, accepting the power and responsibilities from the previous Guardian. Then, to demonstrate their humanity and commitment to peace, after 100 years, they gave up that same power to the next mage chosen to be Guardian. This is important to remember for what will happen in the future. For more than a millennium, an era of prosperity reigned across the whole of Azeroth. Even though conflict was still present from time to time, the Guardians ensured that no demonic intruders would harm the world. As they waged their lonely secret war against the Legion, Dalaran continued to present itself as the world's foremost center of arcane knowledge and research. But this is not the end of the humans' tale. They would be the forefront of many events that would transpire in the future, and we're only at the beginning of discussing their involvement. But it wasn't just them that shaped the history of Azeroth. Deep in the halls of Uldaman, another race was waking from a long slumber, one that would gift the world with technological and military expertise. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support the work that I'm doing, you can check out my membership here on YouTube or over on Patreon. And a big shout out to everyone on the screen here for helping me out. It really does encourage me to make more episodes for you guys. Like this video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time on the Tales of Azeroth.